at least theoretically, at the level of lecturing, we agreed on the fact that there exist methods for accelerating the spiritual evolution. As I was saying, I'm going to continue my series of presentations during the Satsangs. First, I had a project for 3 Satsangs in which I was going to share with you the basic, fundamental, metaphysical principles in which we talked about the existence of a universal consciousness and the possibility of the human being of acceding to that consciousness. We spoke about the phenomenon of evolution, that all the spirituality all over the world is based on this idea that you can take somebody who is like an unpolished diamond and polish them until they become like a polished diamond. This meaning the evolution of the human being from gorilla to angel, from subhuman to superhuman. So everybody agrees that you can influence the evolution of the human being. And the evolution is partly a spontaneous project, a process which is governed by the divine consciousness. Like I did not invent evolution and you did not invent it. It is a divine act. And at the same time that the evolution can be accelerated by human beings that are conscious. A cow cannot do anything to accelerate its own spiritual evolution because a cow has no self-awareness, and because of this it cannot take decisions on its processes. A human being, human beings are the first creatures on the face of this earth, at least as far as we know, that can do this thing. And that's why in the first lecture we discussed about the essentials. Where does all this come from? And then in the last satsang, last week, we talk about the fact that there exist spiritual paths. That's what spiritual paths are. If you are asking yourselves, what's the connection between Buddhism, Christianity, different forms of Hinduism, Sufi, Taoism, what are all these bizarre religions and so-called forms of spirituality? The connection is that all of them have been invented as methods of accelerating the spiritual evolution. People who want to reach nirvana in this lifetime now and not in 1,000,000 years, slowly, slowly, those people use spiritual methods of evolution. That's what spiritual methods are. And some of these spiritual methods are esoteric. They address to a small number of people, and they contain a lot of secrets, such as secret techniques, secret information about the laws of the universe, and they are like elite teachings. And some of them are given to millions of people, they are given to the masses, and consequently they are watered down, and this is what religions are. Religions are, in a certain way, the same thing as spiritual paths, only there is very little information and given to very many people. So we discovered that we have to look into the spiritual paths. And the second step, which we did last time, I narrowed it down to the fact that Agama Yoga belonged to a very special category of spiritual paths, that Agama Yoga belongs to the Tantric Yoga. So I did a lecture last week about what is Tantric Yoga, what is characteristic to our special systems of evolution. And for those of you who were there, you heard about the fact that Tantric Yoga is the rare one, is the path less traveled, is the narrow path, because it is a holistic teaching which is including everything. The Tantric Yoga includes Shakti, includes the feminine aspect, includes the manifestation, includes samsara, includes Maya, and makes clear a teaching in which it is possible to evolve in a holistic manner by taking into account the masculine and the feminine, the non-manifested and the manifested, the spirit and the nature. It is the logical continuation of these two lectures that tonight in the third of the series, and it is the last of this series of 3, then next week I intend to start another subject. But it is logical that now I will narrow down even more, because although Agama Yoga, the school in which you are, it is a school of Tantric Yoga, of course nobody knows or does all the Tantric Yoga. Nobody can cover the whole spectrum of Tantric Yoga, and that's why it is my purpose tonight to tell you what you can expect in Agama Yoga. Many of you are new to Agama Yoga, or even if you are not very, very new, you have not been digging into the metaphysics of it, and that's why many people are not aware of many things. I remember one of our very advanced students who was, at that time and the time when he told me this, he was part of our advanced classes, which means he had done at least 6 years of yoga practice here with Agama before this thing had happened. And he told me, Swami, it actually took me, and was an intelligent man, like he was not, like because he was handicapped in any way, he was saying this. He said, it took me about 5 years until I finally understood what you are trying to do here, how things are going in this school, like how the process of evolution is going. And that sounded like an alarm signal for me, because I would like that people see what expects, what awaits for them in the beginning. You don't need to stay here 5 years and then discover that you were wrong or that you did not like what you saw and all that. And that's why it is I'm trying lately, I'm trying to make this thing as clear as possible. That's why my lecture is about what is Agama Yoga as a school. Of course, we can say that it's a style of yoga, it's a type of yoga. But even this is a very slippery statement, because in the tradition we have branches of yoga, which are called Laya Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Tantric Yoga, and so on and so forth. And then on top of those, we are having different schools of yoga invented in the last 50 years, which are named by some bizarre names, some of them highly inappropriate, some of them egocentric forms of yoga based on the name of some dude or something like that. So starting with the 1960s, when BKS Iyengar published his famous book Light on Yoga, Yoga Dipika, then some people started going in the West and they started advertising that now they teach Iyengar Yoga. Like Iyengar Yoga was different from yoga in any way. It was not. It was the special flavor of one man, and especially it was a special way of teaching Hatha Yoga, like in boot camps. Iyengar Yoga teachers are famous throughout the world that when they do Hatha Yoga, they shout at you, they ask you to push it. It's like a military boot camp of yoga as a special style in doing it. And Iyengar himself as a teacher was very proud of it. He just lived near Osho Rajneesh in Pune, and he felt a huge competition with Rajneeshis and with the Rajneeshi community. And people who went to Iyengar's personal courses and paid a lot of money, they underwent a lot of physical torture, like stretch, stretch, push, 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 and so on. And eventually, when they were totally bruised in the end of a class, Iyengar would flex his muscle and says, how much do you have to go to Osho to feel like you feel right now? Like I am the cherry on top of the cake around here and all that. So ever since that time, in the moment when there started coming doodly-doo and doodly-da yoga, it just became some dude's name yoga or something like that. And that's why you may get a little bit confused by this, because on one hand we have the big names of the traditional forms of yoga, which are branches of yoga, and then in the last 50 years, if somebody does hot yoga or sweaty yoga or hasty yoga or ice-cold yoga or something like this, then they give them names. And today there are probably hundreds of names of different schools of yoga which are supposed to represent different styles of yoga and all that. And that's why in the moment when you talk about Agama Yoga, it's simple to say that, of course, in Agama here, you learn yoga in a certain way. But what is it? Where does the name come from? Is the name significant? And so on. You know that we make a joke, and it is not a malicious joke. I consider it a very candid, innocent joke, that one of the cousins or in-laws of Iyengar, seeing how much success Iyengar did it, he created a version of the Iyengar Yoga, which then got called Ashtanga Yoga. And the name Ashtanga Yoga, we commented in the third night of our yoga courses, because it is sadly an inappropriate name. Ashtanga Yoga is a concept invented by Patanjali, which means yoga has 8 steps, and it starts with yama and niyama, and it goes all the way to dhyana and samadhi. And Ashtanga Yoga, to invent it as a style of very forceful Hatha Yoga, and quick moving and sweating and so on, a sort of a cardio type of yoga, it's an inappropriate name. The guy could have called it whatever his name was, yoga, Mr. Singh Yoga, and that would have said it. That's my style of doing yoga. Ashtanga is a name which says everything and nothing. So that's why I'm saying from the very beginning that when you deal with different names of yoga, there was one thing until the 1960s, and then starting with the 1960s, a totally different trend happened in yoga. And today there are hundreds of names. And again, some of them, you can speak about Shivananda Yoga, that the disciples of Swami Shivananda wanted to give appreciation to the way their guru, who was a very big and famous guru, Swami Shivananda, he taught yoga and he wrote books about yoga. And then they taught, and it is still taught in the world, and practiced the Shivananda Yoga. That is a legitimate way in which you respect a tradition coming from a lineage, coming from a master. First of all, before I go into the depths to see how did we get to this Agama Yoga, because the name was suggested by one of my Indian gurus. And first of all, let's see some of the meanings of this name. First of all, I'm taking information from the Hindu tradition, because most of the yoga of India comes from this Hindu tradition. And Agama, which is a Sanskrit word, means in the Hindu context a traditional doctrine or a system that commands faith. The Agamas, which are texts of Tantric Yoga, are the primary source and authority for yoga methods and instructions in spirituality. Today, most of the yoga which is done has its reflection in the Agamas, and in India it is said that there are 64 such texts. It is said that along the last 2,000 years there have been crystallized 64 texts called Agamas, and there are northern Agamas from Kashmir and Jammu, there are southern Agamas from Tamil Nadu, but all of them 64 in India, and there is a collection of such texts. Some people call the Agamas also Tantras. So Agama, the Agamic tradition, would be called the Tantric tradition. The name is used less and less, except by some scholars, for the reason that the name Tantra suggests in most of the people an association with sexual practices. And there are many, many forms of Tantra which have nothing to do with sexuality. I remember when I was young and going to some national library and finding some texts of Tsongkhapa and other great Tibetan teachers which were speaking about the secret of Tantra. And I said, oh, the secret of Tantra, I want to read that. And I took the book, and the book contained nothing about sexuality. It was just a book about visualizations, mantras, working with deities, worshipping deities, and things like this. And to them, that was the secret of Tantra. And again, because of the name Tantra has such a tinge, even my teachers, when they advised me to teach this Tantric Yoga, I said, so I can call it Tantric Yoga, because we are one of the few schools that teaches full-on Tantric Yoga. And they said, no, it's better that you use the name Agama, the Agamic tradition. It's a more elevate name. Therefore, the Agamas are a sort, if I am to speak to you academically, like in Wikipedia or in the books of Georg Feuerstein, It's a sort of a non-Vedic collection of Sanskrit scriptures which are still revered and followed by millions of Hindus. And in India you can find Shaiva Agamas of the Shaiva part of Hinduism, Vaishnava Agamas of the Vaishnava people from India, Shakta Agamas of the peoples who are worshippers of Shakti. And that's why the very tradition of Agama is very different. Even at the top of Tantric Yoga, and I call the top of Tantric Yoga Kashmiri Shaivism, a form of yoga from Kashmir, which we are fortunate enough to know and to teach in this school. We are one of the very rare schools in the world which gets there. You will hear more about this. The greatest master in history of this school lived in the 10th century in Kashmir, and he was called Abhinavagupta, and he is arguably the greatest tantric master that ever lived in India and perhaps in Tibet, which is a huge statement. It's a very big statement. And Abhinavagupta himself gave a definition to the word Agama because he was going according to the Agamas. He was an Agamite himself. In a certain way, this word Agama allows me, to feel this affiliation, to feel this connection with some of the very, very great masters of the tradition. And there is a short definition which I put in inverted commas, and then there is a longer one. Abhinavagupta, he says the word Agama could be translated as divine speech, like the Word. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word. That word is called speech, or logos by the Greek name, vak or vach in Sanskrit tradition. And Abhinavagupta says Agama is a divine speech, is like the logos that forms the life of other means of knowledge. If those of you who will study philosophy, metaphysics, those of you who will come to study with me Kashmiri Shaivism one day, you will understand this. I'm pretty much sure that if I read just this short sentence, that Agama means divine speech that forms the life of the other means of knowledge. What are the other means of knowledge? Well, the human being knows through the 5 senses, and you can know through direct experience. You can even get some knowledge from pain and suffering. You can get the knowledge from the words of the Guru. You can get knowledge by reading books, and so on and so forth. So Abhinavagupta says that this is the divine speech that forms the life of the other means of knowledge. It's like sort of the divine power, the logos, as called in Greek, again, the ancient logos from the Bible, which is the source of everything. In India called Vak or Paravak, the supreme logos, the supreme speech of God. Even when I read such a thing, I lose half of you already along the way, because Abhinavagupta is an extremely arduous teacher. Abhinavagupta teaches at a level that people that have done 10 years of yoga, of hardcore yoga, they read it 3 times and then they scratch their chin and they wonder, what did this guy want to say? Like, he's speaking at a level which is, so that's because that's the highest tradition in Tantra of India. It's highly metaphysical. And Abhinavagupta, now I'm going to give you the long version to see, and believe me, we explain this and people understand it and they can formulate and understand such text. Agama is the divine speech that forms the life of the other means of knowledge. It is the internal activity of the pure consciousness. It basically consists in a firm hold of consciousness and owes its name to that it allows one to know, which in Sanskrit is called gamana, the object under all its aspects, agama, whence there comes the word agama. Therefore, it is called an agama, like a tantric text. That's the vision of somebody who stayed in samadhi many, many days, months, and years, and who doesn't think like the normal Tom, Dick, and Harry anymore. And it is called an agama, he says, like what? Because you'd say an agama is a text. We have a text which is called the Kularnava Tantra. That's an agama. Says Abhinavagupta, an agama is an ensemble of such holds of consciousness or convictions or beliefs expressed in words. Sounds almost like gibberish. It sounds almost like, what is he talking? Why can't he really say it in plain English or something like that? That's why in the tantric tradition, for those of you who want to go to the place where you speak the bird's language, you can find that as well, and we can express these things at a very, very high level, or we can try to bring them at the common understanding. Of course, the tantric tradition acknowledges that the Agamas, like you can read the Geranda Samhita. Last year I commented the Geranda Samhita, and we even uploaded it on the internet as far as I am aware. And it says that Agamas, so theoretically thousands of people may have heard the lectures on Geranda Samhita, but Abhinavagupta says that they trigger strong beliefs only under certain special circumstances. Like when I teach it to you here, then you go home and do some of it, and it works for you, and it is alive. And somebody just reads it in a book and puts it back on the shelf and never goes further than that. So only under special circumstances we can crystallize this superior knowledge and bring it in your lives, make it part of your lives, make it alive and in reality, and that it works in certain epochs and places. It is a well-known thing that the golden time of the tantric and yogic tradition may have passed, at least in some countries, only to the people who are qualified for understanding and applying them. Like you can read it and you can stand on your head and derive benefits from it, and your mother will read the same book and will say, this sounds really bizarre, and not do anything about it. So not even two people reading the same book will get the same effect out of it. And who give them credit, thus believing in their teachings. The Agama traditions have been the source of all the early yogic and self-realization concepts in India. They have influenced thinkers and philosophers who sought an alternative to the excessive ritualism and sacrifices of the Vedic system of that time. India started its spirituality with the Vedas. And until today, many authors that say Vedas, 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 like the Vedas and the Vedic tradition is the cherry on top of the cake. Ultimately, when you read the Vedas, you find out that after you read 1 hour of the Vedas, you can't really go home and do anything from it, because the Vedas are mostly like hymns, like poetry. And okay, it's very nice poetry and it can touch my soul, but practically what do I learn from that? The truth of the tradition is that the Vedas were written for people who lived about 6,000 years ago or more, and we are not those people. And as the human civilization has changed, so did the texts and the methods. That's why it is a well-known thing in India. It's written in various texts that there were in the old days people were fed by the Vedas. Then they started writing the Samhitas and the Puranas, which are like legends and myths. Then they started writing the Upanishads, and finally there came the Tantric tradition. Like even in India and in Tibet, they consider that the Tantric tradition is the most updated spiritual tradition made for people of the 15th century, made for people of the 20th and 21st century. This kind of yoga which is with resonance, with energies, with understanding of the transfer of energy, of what's happening in my first body, in my second body, in my third body, in my fourth body, and in my fifth body, of what's happening in my third chakra, if it is yin or if it is yang, and all these precise things are the way modern people are thinking. People thousands of years ago, when many, many of the ancient texts were written, people thought in a different way. There was not so much mathematics. There was not so much positive science. There was not so much rationalism. There was not so much dialectics. Like the human thinking and philosophy was of a very different order, and that's why spirituality was taught in a different order. It is said, for example, just to give you a comparison, it is claimed that in the 1st century, the first Christians were getting baptized in the early Christian communities of Europe under the persecution of the Roman Empire. Sometimes they reached states of samadhi when they were baptized. In the moment when they were put in the water, some of them entered in ecstasy. So powerful the baptism was for those people in those days. Today, many, many people get baptized every day and they don't go in samadhi because of it. So something has changed. I remember when I read a study made about the first Christian monasteries at the time of Basil the Great in the 3rd century or 4th century, wherever it was. And it was a common practice that every single monk in some monastery, not the champions, every single monk, like every pupil in an ashram, they slept in a sitting position. They were sitting on a chair the whole night. This was their sleep. And they slept like this, and then they woke up in the morning and they did a full day of work, and they were not lying down. This you would expect that only Milarepa can do that only one yogi in a million can do that, only the champs. But in those days, in the 3rd century, everybody did it. I remember I got so crazy when I read this thing in that book that for 1 week I slept on a chair. I wanted to see, like, if everybody could do it in a monastery, it means it's not impossible. I thought only the great saints could do it. If everybody did it, it means it's humanly feasible. And I discovered it was feasible. And I discovered that it produced an activation of your kundalini. If you sleep for more than 3 days up, with your spine up, something starts happening. You have pain in all your body. It's very uncomfortable. You are longing to lie down every moment of the day. It's like a sweet torture. But spiritually, it's like it's producing an incredible effect. And that's why I'm telling you all these things, to understand that spirituality changes, because people change. Try to realize, in Tibet, if you went to a monastery, there was probably more diversity in the monastery than outside. There were shepherds in Tibet and other parts of the world. There was no radio, no television, no printed press, no books, no theater, especially in the abandoned, in the isolated places. There was nothing. Like, there are places where there is no electricity, there is nothing. People would have a long stick and put their head like this and stand looking at their sheep for 3-4 hours non-stop. And they are almost not thinking. They are just standing there. And life flows in a very, 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 very slow way. And nothing happens for weeks. If you take a person from the 21st century who is grown up with subway and internet and airplanes and smartphones and all, and you suddenly throw them in such a place, you should see what's happening here. Half of our Agama great yogis, when the electricity stops for 3 hours, everybody goes neurotic. It's like your life has fallen apart. It's like there is no more meaning in life. You can't do anything because you have no electricity. But Abhinavagupta never had electricity. And he looked at the mountains all day long. And there were no big libraries and things like that. Maybe for Abhinavagupta, who was a scholar, but many others didn't have any access to anything. What I'm trying to say is that humanity has changed a lot. And if you take, it's a well-known thing, and that's why I'm not pressing on most of you in many ways. It's known that if you take a normal person, a normal average person, and you throw them in a very silent place, they go crazy. It even became a method of torture used by CIA. They just pushed people in silent rooms, in completely soundproof rooms in a basement. And they let them 3 hours in total silence. And people started banging their heads against the wall until blood came out of their heads. Like they went completely nuts. They lost it simply because it was too quiet. It was too silent, and you are not used with things being so silent. So that's why I say Tibetans were having methods, in which people would go in a cave and then they would be walled in a cave. It was very difficult. Many people lost their mind if they are left alone for 3 years, not seeing anybody. Just stay in a dark room and pray to God. Meditate all day long until you start doing astral projection and your astral body starts going out of the room and traveling consciously. If you succeed, you become a big yogi and you get great paranormal powers. But most people did not succeed. Most people just went nuts because going from a high level of excitement of the brain and then not having any, most people wouldn't know what to do. There are many people who told me, Swami, if I stay in my bungalow more than 2 hours, I feel like I want to howl like a wolf. I have to go out there and rub shoulders with somebody. That's Svadhisthana. That's what we say, that people are like lemmings. Because people define themselves only by rubbing antlers with others. But who can sit in a room for 5 days without seeing anybody and feel perfectly okay, feel even better than before? Because Buddha spent a lot of time alone. Jesus, others, they spend a lot of time alone. Spirituality is usually not done by rubbing antlers with other people. Spirituality is done by isolating and going deep in you. And for some people, this is like madness. That's why spirituality itself has changed, and there are many, many issues relating to this. And that's why in India they say the modern spirituality is Tantra. The Tantric spirituality is made for the people of this millennium because it is adapted to their mentality. So I told you some things about these Agamas known as Tantras. So you know where the name is coming, first of all. I would like to give you some interesting synchronicities because I researched the name Agama when I called the school Agama, and I discovered that the name Agama exists even in the Greek language, but it exists in many other Indian and surrounding cultures, and it has very parallel meanings. For example, in the Jain tradition, Jainism is a tradition very close to Buddhism as origin. In the Jain tradition, Agamas are canonical texts of Jainism. They are also texts, so they are texts called Agama, based on Mahavira's teachings. Mahavira is like the Buddha of Jainism, is the creator of Jainism. Mahavira's preachings were orally compiled by his disciples into various sutras, which were collectively called Jain canonical or Agamic literature. In the Buddhist tradition, the word Agama also exists, and an Agama, which is the Sanskrit and Pali for sacred work or scripture, so it's again about scriptures, about texts. It is a collection of early Buddhist scriptures which were preserved primarily in Chinese translation, with substantial material also surviving in Sanskrit and lesser but still significant amounts surviving in Gandhari and in Tibetan translation. So there is an Agamic, Tantric, Buddhist tradition as well. In the Malay language, from Malaysia, the word Agama literally means religion. You will go in Malaysia and you will see parts in the bookstores which says Agama. And it's about Islam. It simply means religion, and it refers to their dominant religion in there. In Greek, by the way, the word Agama comes from Gama. Gama means gender or sex. So Agama means without gender or sex, beyond gender or sex. Now that I told you a few things about the name, that was just a bit of scholarship, I will come back to the facts and tell you some of the things which you may expect to encounter if you study with Agama, because you cannot see all of those when you are in the first level, second level, third level. Many people think that how is it possible that you are going in some places and you study for 1 month and they say they taught you yoga, and then you come here and you study 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and you haven't even seen the whole tip of the iceberg. Like, how big can yoga actually be? That there have been people, you'll discover that there are people around here who have been here for more than 10 years. What the heck are they doing here? Wasting their time, still studying. Are they learning something actually? Did they learn new stuff? Is it possible to still learn new stuff even after 5 years? Is yoga such a deep hole? Like, is there so much in it? That's why I'm going to give you a little bit of the coordinates of what we do here. And if you will be interested, ask me in the Q&A sessions, and I will explain with pleasure. I'll go deeper in any of those. First of all, Agama, as all beginners see, is based on the tantric types of Hatha Yoga. When you go first time to the first level, the first 3-4 days we drive you crazy with a lots of lectures and a lots of knowledge, and at the same time you start timidly bending over, stretching up, and doing various things, and then those things become more and more and more. And those of you who are now in the 3rd week of the first level, for example, you are having a full-on program, and by the end of the month it's going to become double as long, and then you are going to start asking yourself, when can I do all these? And you haven't explored, you explored just the first level of Agama, and there are many. So we start always, when you start, you see this Tantric Hatha Yoga, which works with energies, with chakras, with channels of energy, with the 5 bodies. You encounter there the concept of sublimation. You speak about sexual energy. You speak about mental energy. You speak about the use of mantras, yantras, and you speak about the transformation of one energy, like sexual energy transformed into mental energy, and other such things. This is all the keynote of the Tantric Yoga, especially Hatha Yoga with the Tantric profile. It goes always like this. Hatha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, healing parts of yoga, Ayurvedic, and others. In India, these traditions of yoga were once upon a time embodied specially by one powerful school called Natha Sampradaya. They were called themselves Natha because Shiva, the guru of yoga, was called Adinatha, the first of the Naths. And they called themselves Naths. And the first guru of this tradition was the very big Matsyendra Nath, who allegedly got the tradition directly from Shiva in vision. And then Matsyendra had a very big disciple called Goraksha Nath. And Matsyendra Nath and Goraksha Nath founded the Nath Sampradaya. And in this Nath Sampradaya is the part of India from where comes most of this story with Hatha Yoga, with healing in yoga, with the connections with Ayurveda, that if you do this asana, it increases your Kapha dosha, and if you do this asana, it may increase your Pitta dosha, and therefore you should connect the Hatha Yoga practice with your Ayurvedic diet, structure, and so on. They practiced things like alchemy, shamanism. For example, it is the Natha yogis who came up with texts like the text on urine therapy, that if for a month you eat only this and that, and then you collect your morning urine and mix it with the juice of this plant, and then you drink it, in a 1 month you are going to start seeing auras because it opens your third eye. This kind of statements, which I collected, they are collected in a text called Amaru Tantra, which I translated and retranslated for people. It's one of the books which we used to have in the shop, and it's just a small exercise in Sanskrit translation. These are typical, the Natha Sampradaya, the school of the Naths, which through Matsyendra and his disciples, this is something which Agama has inherited very well from various gurus. Swami Shivananda and then his disciple Swami Satyananda were teaching a bit of that. Dhirendra Brahmachari and his guru, coming from his guru Maharshi Kartikeya, who allegedly lived 300 years in a body just by doing Hatha Yoga, lots of it every day, and living an exemplary lifestyle, and so on, and others. These traditions of Hatha Yoga are very well preserved in Agama. Proof of this is also the fact that we understand the connections between energies, mantras, chakras, channels of energy, 5 bodies, and all that, sublimation, what to do with the sexual energy, how to sublime it, and a lot of other things. The fact that Agama also has a powerful impact on people's health and other bodily oriented things, this is all one of the pillars of Agama. When you come to Agama, usually that's what you see first, because that's the thing which we can teach to everybody from the very beginning. And I'm just calling your attention on the fact that this pillar alone goes very deep. If some of you will want to study all the Hatha Yoga, all the pranayamas, all the Kundalini exercises, all the knowledge of the 5 bodies and mantras and channels of energy and chakras, main and secondary chakras, and all that, takes a pretty long time to study that. It's a very, very powerful part of yoga. And we have in the school some of our advanced pupils here, teachers, who are very focused in that direction, and they do Kundalini Yoga retreats and other such things here for Agama. The second great pillar, another great pillar of what we do here in Agama, and this is something less known, but it is perhaps the part which brings us the most rotten eggs, because is the famous Kaula tradition, Kula or Kaula tradition, which is the tradition of the Mahavidyas, is a tradition of Shaktism, Shakti worship. It is the tradition of sexual tantra. It is the tradition of ritual, of yantras, and other such things. This is a very powerful tradition. Very little is officially known about these things, and I will not even start tonight to dig into the exotic parts of it. I can do it maybe in a Q&A if you ask me to go there. But the Kaula tradition in India had a long story. Kaula or Kulami meant the inner circle. It is used sometimes with the words like Guru Kula. Guru Kula means the family of the Guru, the inner circle, the people who are really close to the Guru. And Kaula therefore means a trusted circle, a circle of trust. And the Kaula school worked exactly like this, that they were grouping themselves into small families, into small ashrams, into small circles of trust, because they could not afford their secrets to be betrayed to the outsiders. So it were like very, very esoteric inner circles of people who did things. And many of the Kaula people, following in the footsteps of some tantric tradition, they were actually upper class Hindu people, like rich Hindu people who lived in mansions and palaces, so they could lock themselves in very exclusive places and do the practices. These were not people who lived in a forest or in a cave, usually. Some of them were wandering mendicants. And the Kaula tradition, they did hide themselves for a good reason, because also they were doing these Shakti aspects and the Shakti worship, and they did sexual tantra, and they did elements of sexual magic, and they were very secretive about this because the rest of the population was not supposed to see or know these things. For example, in India, there were very many famous issues where people from a village, they discovered one morning that the last night the Kaulas had been in their temple by night time, after nightfall, and they had performed some rituals. They could find traces which showed that people have been here, but they didn't know who those people were, how did they synchronize, what time did they arrive, what time did they leave, and what did they do in the temple. And these were so secretive, the Kaulas were, that they were like a sort of an underground organization in the Indian society. And sometimes they thought they would be persecuted. After the 12th century, when India was ruled by Muslim dynasties, Kaulas went even deeper underground because they felt they would be persecuted by the Islamic religion that was ruling. After the 16th, 17th centuries, the Mughal dynasties declined, and the Portuguese and then the British arrived. And the British were not more happy about the Kaulas because, of course, the Victorian England was horrified when they heard that there are some people who call themselves spiritual and who get naked and 20 people make love together or something. This was completely heathen and barbaric in the view of the British of that century. And therefore, actually, the British even gave a special program to the Indian police to persecute the Kaulas wherever they found them. And so the Kaula almost disappeared. There are very few lineages which remained alive. What you encounter here in Agama from the Kaula teachings is, first of all, the use of the Mahavidyas, the female transfiguration, the use of the 10 goddesses, that you see those symbols of female powers, or you see in the garden there, they are Kaula stuff. They are coming from the Shakta tradition of India, and they are very powerful. They form a special form of yoga which is called Mahavidya Yoga, which has a great impact on our advanced practitioners. It's a highly symbolic system. It's more on the Indian side of the Himalayas. It's up in the Himalayas, but on the Indian side. And worship of Shakti means understanding of the feminine nature, understanding of the feminine energy. which I told you already that Tantric Yoga is very good at. Sexual practices, sexual yoga, Tantra, but it is more the mystical aspect than the mechanical aspects of this. Today, there are many texts which talk about Tantra, and I call them airport Tantra books. They are like Kama Sutra. They show you two nice people having sex in 32 positions, and because they light a candle or because they are holding hands before having sex, this is supposed to be Tantra. And this is, of course, a New Age diluted view of this, because there is a highly mystical aspect in the Tantric tradition, more than the mechanical aspect, that if you make love in this position, you stimulate the G-spot, and if you make love in this position, you stimulate the cervix, and those are true. But that is like at the level of zootechnics. You know, it's like it's at the level of mating. There are many more aspects of the energy, mantras, visualization, transfiguration, astral body, mental body, and higher things which need to be explored. And that's why I was talking even today with somebody, and they said, well, I feel that your workshops, because I did some things of Tantra, and I feel that the workshops here are pretty basic. And I said, in a certain way, you are right. Like our workshops of Tantra are generally 10 times, giving 10 times more practical knowledge than you get in other Tantra workshops in the world. And still they are pretty basic from another standpoint, because this rabbit hole called Tantra, it goes very, very deep. It's very mystical in many ways. And the Kaula tradition is represented. Because we have this part, this is one of the things which produces most accusations leveled at Agama. Agama, if we would be just doing Hatha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, chakras and those, and if we'd be doing Kashmiri Shaivism and the other future things which on my list, there would be much less to speak about Agama. But because we do the Kaula part, which is about the sexual practices, all this magical sexuality, all this spiritual sexuality, this is one of the things because of which people do come to Agama. It is a well-known thing that a large percentage of you who came to Agama, you came to Agama precisely because you heard that we are wild and unleashed in some mysterious ways, and you would like to know more about these. And on the other hand, they do produce some harassment and some negativity leveled at Agama, but that's the way it is. 80 years ago, when Mircea Eliade wrote the first PhD in the world about yoga, he said yoga can be judged, evaluated, only by those who have practiced it for a year or two, at least. The same with Tantra. It's very difficult to listen to tantric judgmentalism of people who never tried to do 1 year or 2 years of Tantra, but they already think that they know what they are talking about. So it's the same here. This part of the yoga tradition, of the tantric tradition that we have in Agama, is very powerful, really powerful, and it has changed completely the lives of some people. On the other hand, it is, of course, provocative. It pushes people's buttons. This part is not part of our main curriculum. As you know, I'm saying it in the beginning lectures. This is a parallel system of education where people come to Tantra workshops and others, and they learn it separately from our yoga courses. We don't teach this part throughout the yoga courses, precisely because it pushes some people's buttons and we want to give them an option. The third pillar of what we do in Agama, and this is a very big pillar also, is what we call Trika or Kashmiri Shaivism, the top-notch thing, the metaphysics and philosophy. This is a tradition which today 90% of what has remained, and most people didn't even hear about it, but those who heard about it, 90% and more, it just illustrated by Sanskritologists in Italy, England, France, United States, Austria, Germany, a few countries who have solid Sanskritological Indology universities. They are studying, not exclusively, but among others, some of them study Kashmiri Shaivism, and they know that that's the cherry on top of the cake of everything which has been done in India in the last thousands of years. But when it comes to practice, like what do you do, practice is almost inexistent. There are about 3-4 places on the face of this earth where people practically teach things of Kashmiri Shaivism, like practical things, not let's analyze a text. Text analysis is not practice. Practice is when you close your eyes and for 2 hours you do something, and in the end it has had an effect on your crown chakra or on your heart chakra or something, and that's what I'm talking about. Here in Agama, we are extremely lucky, we are extremely blessed to have the heritage of that as well. Not only that we've got a kick-ass Kundalini and Hatha Yoga, not only that we've got the provocative Kaula traditions, but we also bask in the sun of the Kashmiri Shaivism, which is the top of the mysticism in India. Like scholars who write about it, they don't hesitate to say this is the top of everything. Most people who didn't hear about it, they even are scandalized, because most of the normal yogis from India, they think that Vedanta is some of the highest things ever created in India. And they say, what about Shankaracharya? What about Advaita Vedanta? It's a delight for me to provoke those of you who think that. And maybe you'll pick up the challenge and verify me on that. Kashmiri Shaivism goes beyond Shankaracharya and Vedanta. It's something even more formidable than that. But very few people have the karma to hear about this. It's almost like one of those accursed information, wall of silence. It's almost like Kashmiri Shaivism is a bit too good for the 21st century or something, because this tradition, which is so high, is almost vanishing. I can say from the very beginning that from the metaphysical and philosophical standpoint, this is the core tradition in Agama Yoga. That means if you dig at me, I'm going to give you, my ultimate answers are going to be according to the Trika tradition of Abhinavagupta, the so-called Kashmiri Shaivism. And that's why the vision of the Agama school is that of Kashmiri Shaivism, which means it's a non-dualistic vision. It's a very high form of non-dualism. And that's why a lot of teachings come from this Kashmiri Shaivism. One of my good friends who is teaching the tradition of Hridaya, and some of you know Sahajananda, he's also taken most of his teachings called Hridaya. They are based on traditions of Kashmiri Shaivism, of Trika. It is acknowledged by yogis who discovered it that this is the highest tradition. It is such a high tradition that in yoga we even say that you have to have a very good karma for it. When the last great master of Kashmiri Shaivism died in 1991 or 92, if I remember correctly, and I'm talking about Swami Lakshman Brahmacharin, Swami Lakshmanju from Srinagar, from Kashmir. When he passed away, he realized he had a huge library of books of Kashmiri Shaivism, and he realized that even among his pupils, even among the Hindus of Kashmir, there was nobody who could understand or use those. And on his deathbed, he made a wish that he donated a truck or 2 trucks of books to the Bihar School of Yoga, which is one of the very few schools of yoga in India, founded by Swami Satyananda, which claims to still respect or look into the tantric teachings, because the name tantric is so provocative and it brings so much harassment. And Swami Lakshmanju left his books to Bihar School of Yoga. He said, maybe because they are a tantric school, maybe they will be able to value my priceless books and my historical things. It is true that about 5 years after that, or 6 years after that, Bihar School of Yoga, they published their own translation, their own edition of the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, one of the fundamental texts of Kashmiri Shaivism, which we teach here in Agama. For the connoisseurs, it was very sad to see that the Bihar School of Yoga edition was poor. It was a poor edition. They did not have students of Kashmiri Shaivism there, and they did not manage to go too deep, too far in that study. Agama Yoga is one of the few places on earth where you can learn Kashmiri Shaivism in practice. Like, what did they actually do, not just philosophy or Sanskritological analysis of texts. Besides these three pillars, like our yoga is made from this. Hatha Yoga, Kundalini, Chakras, all that caboodle, which is very big. The Tantric part, the Shaktism with Kaula tradition. Kashmiri Shaivism, which is the cherry on top of the cake. I would throw the glove and simply say, I don't think you'll find ever anything higher than that. I know that some of you are thinking about Tibetan Dzogchen and other apparently very high disciplines. Believe me, all those have been taken into account, and still people say there is nothing higher than Kashmiri Shaivism. So it must be something really, really high. Here in Agama, because that comes in a bit of a later stages, what we can do is to give a KS intro and a KS retreat every year. This year, somewhere in April, if I remember correctly, we have our intro to Kashmiri Shaivism and followed by an 8-day retreat. So those of you who want to see, although you haven't done 5-6 years of yoga, but you still want to see what's in it, you can have an appetizer, you can have a herald of the goods to come by joining a KS intro. That's if they are among some of you, because that's one of the detractions launched at Agama, that because we do sexual tantric yoga, we are supposed to be just a bunch of animals, a bunch of horny animals, and there is no finesse in Agama. There is nothing refined or something like this. I invite anybody who has heard such rubbish to come to the Kashmiri Shaivism intro, and if you understand half of it by the end of it, it means you are very, very gifted, and then you will see approximately where we go in Agama. So don't worry that in Agama we don't have heights. We have incredible heights, and I just hope you can scale those heights, you can climb those heights. Besides these three pillars, which are what makes our yoga, that's what makes our yoga, still, of course, there is a fourth pillar, which we called miscellanea, because in the Agama teachings we have perhaps 25%, perhaps less, of the Agama teachings. They come from elsewhere than from those three sources mentioned before. And other things, therefore, which you can find in Agama are influences from the classical forms of yoga, such as Patanjali's classical yoga. Just 2 years ago I finished, or 3 years ago, I finished a commentary to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It might be on the internet, or parts of it might be there. So we are perfectly aware of Patanjali, of Yoga Sutra. I'm teaching a Raja Yoga workshop in a few days, and there we are going to do things from Patanjali, because that's where Raja Yoga is. I finished a commentary on the 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita also teaches us about Karma Yoga and other fundamental aspects of Indian spirituality. I have been influenced by the teachings of some of the great masters of yoga, like Swami Shivananda has always been one of my spiritual heroes, and I read pretty much everything which Shivananda wrote. And therefore, there are many influences of Shivananda's teachings here in Agama. Other great teachers, Paramhamsa Ramakrishna, Swami Gitananda, Dhirendra Brahmachari, and others. In this diverse pillar, we are having a lot of elements of Tibetan yoga. When I was young, I was told by some persons endowed with clairvoyance that I had a series of lives lived in Tibet under Tibetan yoga, and I acknowledged immediately that actually that must have been true, because I was totally in love with the Tibetan tradition, with the Tibetan people, with the Tibetan yoga, and especially with their style of doing yoga. The Tibetan style of doing yoga is a bit more fanatical, a bit more crazy than the style from India. It's a bit of a more die-hard type of style of yoga. And there are in the Tibetan tradition some things which have been lost in India. Around the 8th century, 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, Tibetan yogis took everything they could from India and they moved it to Tibet. And this is how you had great gurus like Marpa, Milarepa, and others. And then the funny thing is that in India, yoga became persecuted, because in the 12th century, the rulers of India became Muslim. And thus, many things of yoga disappeared in India, and they survived until today just because they were given to the Tibetans. Giving it to the Tibetans paradoxically made it survive. And examples are our workshop on the art of dying, which is based on Bardo Todol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. These teachings about how to die, what is death, and all the teachings related to it, they persist in India very vaguely. Like Swami Shivananda wrote a book on the fate of the soul after death, or what is death and the fate of the soul after death, or something, which shows that Indian yogis know many of these things, but there is not an organized tradition about it. In Tibet, there is a whole organized tradition about the art of dying, and that thing mixed up with the knowledge of Kundalini Yoga and Tantric Yoga from India is dynamite. That's stuff which we teach, for example, like we have the Tibetan part of the art of dying, the Pova and all the things. The Kala Chakra, the yoga of Shambhala, of how to connect with Shambhala, we used in the previous years to do meditations every Wednesday evening about Shambhala. Now they will be moved in the morning. Every week, one morning meditation will be a Shambhala meditation for those of you who come to the morning meditations. The yoga of the 5 elements and of the Dhyani Buddhas and other such things which are very precious, you will find them in Agama. I was in the Tibetan environments. I had Tibetan teachers with whom I confronted these teachings, and I remember that once, many years ago, I think I was in Dharamsala, listening to some of the initiations given by the Dalai Lama, and I met with a Phangan, a Westerner who was a Tibetan monk, and when this guy heard that I could teach Pova, that I was capable to teach Pova, and I could teach Chod and Tumo and Kala Chakra, he said, I have been a monk for 17 years. And he said, only 2 times in 17 years, I heard that somebody in the Tibetan circles was teaching the 6 yogas of Naropa, like Tumo or something. And I couldn't even attend it because it was too difficult to get there or something. So even people from the Tibetan tradition were like flabbergasted that Agama has inherited such teachings, is going into such powerful teachings. And that's why Tibetan yoga, classical yoga, and other such elements from Hridaya yoga, from the Vedantic teachings of Ramakrishna and others, you will find such things in Agama. We took the things which we thought they were directly useful to our pupils, useful in the process of evolution as we see it here. Due to the metaphysical understanding which we have here, and I expressed that a little bit 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to express that thoroughly in our metaphysical workshop, which is going to happen somewhere around June. Every year we have a metaphysical workshop here and one in Rishikesh. And of course, according to metaphysics, the truth is one, and there is no higher religion than the truth. There is nothing higher than that. That's why various religions gave to this one truth its own name. Some have called it the Buddha nature or the Nirvana, and some have called it Atman or Brahman or God or whatever. But there is only one thing in this reality that is absolute and infinite. There's only one thing. There cannot be 2 things which are absolute. And that the Buddhists, when they speak about the Buddha nature and Nirvana, they speak about one. And the Hindus, when they speak about Brahman and the absolute, they speak about something else. Then one of them is not absolute, is fake. And thus, in metaphysics, we know that all the spiritualities have one single source, and therefore the same one, it is the same one that all the schools in the world are talking about, just that one is described differently. Like Buddha and Jesus are talking about the same one, immortality, but it's described very differently. And that's why, because of this knowledge, Agama Yoga is open generally to the teachings of any legitimate tradition. Like I remember we had somebody who at some point wanted to teach the way of the Sufi dervishes to pray by spinning, by the dervish dance. We had some of our colleagues from Turkey, some of our pupils from Turkey, who wanted to share with the whole world, because they live in the land of the Sufis. They have been to the Sufi gatherings. Some of them are part of Sufi dargahs, of Sufi organizations and schools. Some of them have been authorized to dance the Sufi dances, and some of them have shared them with their spiritual colleagues from Agama. So in this way, the fourth pillar of Agama is this diversity, that we have some beautiful things taken from other traditions. For example, many people hear me speaking often about Jesus, which is a rather persecuted personality in today's society, because people think that Jesus and the Christian church are one and the same thing. And when we speak about Jesus from a yogic standpoint, many people understand amazing things. And we have people here in the school, yes, even Jewish people, even Muslim people, who are totally in love with Jesus because they surpassed the frame of their religion. They try to understand Jesus as Yogananda did, as Ramakrishna did, as Shivananda did, with the eyes of the yogis, not with the eyes of people belonging to some religious environment. And that's why we have here this openness to different forms of spirituality, but of course they have to belong to legitimate traditions. I, for one, everybody knows that because I'm trying to give a scientific and rational approach, I'm a person who started his life as an atheist. For the first 16, 17 years of my life, I grew up in an atheistic family, in an atheistic society, and it was not easy for my teachers to bring me to the awareness of spirituality. In the beginning, I asked for proofs, I asked for correlations, I asked for everything which could put it in the right perspective. For me, the word spirit, when I was 16 years old, was a spooky, forbidden word, which belonged to some cultish, or my grandmother could believe in things like that. And that's why I always try to have to yoga a spiritual and, a scientific and rational approach. And even after I have done many years of yoga, this has stayed. And it has stayed not because of my grandmother and of Jesus, because I had a great opening and love towards Jesus. It came because the modern society is polluted by a parasitic pseudo-spirituality called New Age. And this New Age is preaching all sorts of forms of insanity, really, really insanity. I remember it was illustrated so well. I went with a friend, acquaintance of mine when I lived in Denmark. This guy was probably 99% atheistic, or he had a very, very thin veneer of religion on him. And he was an electronics engineer, a man driving a red Porsche, who had a swimming pool in the basement of his villa, like a man who lived for money, for luxury, for society. He was a member of the Rotary Club, traveling on the money of the Rotary Club to many countries. Like he was this kind of citizen of the world. And he accompanied me to an alternative fair. I was living in Copenhagen in those days, and they had once a year an alternative fair, where all the alternative people of Copenhagen showed up. And after we made a tour through whatever was posted there were 100 booths of people advertising for their things, from the Pentecostal church to some guys who were making copper-wired stargates. Stargate was very fashionable in those years. So people were building stargates already with copper wires and crystals and stuff like that. And after we went through that, I could feel that this guy was becoming more and more awkward as we went through it. And by the time we had crossed about 80% of this fair, he couldn't take it anymore. He just pulled me by the arm in one corner, and he looked at me with very suspicious eyes, like, I don't know anymore if I know who you are. Like, I thought I knew you, but now after this fair, if you brought me to this fair, he looked at me and he said, Swami, I hope you realize that 90% of what we've seen here is totally baloney. And I clapped him on the shoulder. I said, yes, Finn, of course I know. We know in spirituality that about 90% of what is preached is baloney. Because it's this New Age thing. And he, as an engineer, and as this, he said, how can people come up with this kind of things, you know? It's like some of you read materials where people say, I have a message coming to you from the 5th dimension. If I had 1 hour now, I could crushingly explain to all of you that almost nobody knows what the 5th dimension means or what it is. The fact that some amateurs who didn't even take a 101 in physics dare to open their mouth and pronounce the words the 5th dimension without brushing their teeth before and after is just an example of what's happening in this world. You know, it's like, of course, somebody who has a scientific education, when he hears a jerk saying the magic words, the 5th dimension, they start rolling on the floor with laughter and saying, right, yeah, right. You know, it's like, I know now what you're talking about. I know what kind of people you are. So Agama, with all those 4 pillars which I mentioned, did not lose its scientific and rational approach. And believe me, I hear quite often people who are coming and making extraordinary statements. And usually, you know, I'm telling, if you come to yoga for 6 weeks, you will see if it works or not. What can you show me about what you are saying, you know? It's like, is there a demonstration that you could give about pranic healing or about this or that? What can you do which is not subjective and measurable scientifically? That's why I'm saying this you will find in Agama. We are not a school of exalted mystics who are ready to believe in motherships coming from the Pleiades and channeling messages to the mortals. You will not find this kind of extravagant statements about it. I remember I was with one of the guys who wrote, with Michael Hutchinson, who wrote the Mega Brain book, and they invited a guy, and I think they invited him to just make fun of him. It was a very cruel meeting. It was an American guy called Bob. This guy, Michael Hutchinson, made fun of him from one end of the meeting to the other. This guy was wearing a tachyonic tie. He had brought, there was a Japanese company who was compacting some polymers and was making something which looks like the tiger's eye, this mineral, and they were supposed to be tachyonic materials, which had in it tachyonic energies. Most people who say those words, they don't even know what it's supposed to mean. Like, what is tachyonic, and what would it entail, and so on, and how could you demonstrate such a thing? Believe me, they sold it, those Japanese people, they sold worth of millions of dollars of tachyonic plastic to the whole world, because it was supposed to make you young again and make your mustache black and virile and all that, you know. So it's like a lot of New Age preposterous statements I have seen in my life, and that's why in Agama we take it easy. We want that if some of you do some things, you actually do those things. I remember one of my teachers, somebody in a meeting got exalted and he said, we should keep a 3-minute silence for I don't know what people who have sacrificed their lives in I don't know what circumstance. So everybody stood up very solemnly, and then after about 20 seconds, that guy said, okay, thank you. At which one yoga teacher from the crowd jumped up and he said, you said 3 minutes, for God's sake. Can you not just stand quiet with your eyes closed 3 minutes? On the clock, you know, on the clock, not symbolic 3 minutes. Actual 3 minutes, you know. Don't give me this thing that you say, I'm going to do something, and after 20 seconds, the mental monkey is somewhere else already. Let's do it 3 minutes if we said 3 minutes, you know. So that's what I'm talking about. This is the spirit in Agama. What we do here to educate you in all these marvelous things, which are a great heritage, we have a curriculum which is grouped like that. We have a very intensive first level, because yoga cannot usually be taught so intensively forever. I mean, people say, why don't you keep on teaching in the second, third, fourth, fifth, like in the first month? You can't. First month is breakneck, and it's a sort of collector. We have many people, even in this hall, who stuck their head into the hall of Agama to hear what are these dudes talking about. They listened for 5 minutes, and now it's 6 years later, and they are still in Agama. So our yoga halls are very dangerous once people stick their head in, because it's enough to stick your head in for 5 minutes and to discover that, whoa, this is something else. I never heard anything like this. These people are doing something very different from what I thought yoga is or so. There are many people who come to me at the final ceremony and they say, Swami, we never knew that such a thing even existed on the face of this earth. That's what I've been looking for many years. I will make plans to come back to go a little bit deeper, because this is something which I really need. So Agama fulfills that. It starts with the first level, which is highly intensive. It continues with levels 2 and 3 to give you a little bit of a thought about how it continues, to see how it is. And then about the end of the third level, you decide if you want to become an aspirant, a postulant in the school. You go to the level number 4, and there you continue from there. From level 4, the teachings are going deeper and deeper with the initiations in the chakras, with the Mahavidyas, with a lot of other things which are coming there. And we are trying to teach you the basic asanas and the basic pranayamas of yoga until the level 14. Like in 10 levels from 4 to 14, we teach you the basic Hatha Yoga and the basic elements of this. After that, there comes a period of deepening yoga, where right now people are doing some of the practices of Kundalini Yoga. That's another 10, 11, 12 levels. Kundalini Yoga is more advanced, like you have to have 2 years of yoga practice at least, so that you don't break your neck and you don't destroy your energy channels in doing that thing. And it's way more powerful. There is a bit of an appetizer of that given in the Serpent Power retreats. We have Serpent Power retreats here in the school. And if you want to see a little bit what Kundalini Yoga looks like, there you go. And then after people finish this second part of yoga, like the first part takes about 2 years to complete, second part takes about 2 years to complete. Then we go to the third major part. By now you have done 4 years of yoga, so you are pretty good at it, believe me. And when you go in the third part of yoga, our third part of the program is a program of deepening the knowledge of the chakras as much as it can get. We have a program called the tapas, where people for 1 year and 8 months, 1 year and 6 months, they go on a personal tapas where they use the most powerful methods, going and studying each and every chakra at a time. They do hundreds of hours of work on each chakra to go deep, deep, deep. There's a special protocol, a special type work pattern which we use. So by the end of 6 years of yoga, people in this school will get such a knowledge of chakras that you will not find more than 1,000 people on the face of this earth that have such a knowledge of chakras, like who can go so deep and identify, recognize, work, understanding the 5 elements. It's a very, very deep level of practice. After that, those who still resist and want more, after the 6 levels, these 3 levels, people are joining and studying yoga directly with me. As you know, I cannot show up much in the school. I show up for questions and answers, for satsangs. I sometimes come to the beginners of the first month, but if I'm doing most of the teachings in a week, which I'm doing, are supposed to be teaching addressing to the advanced pupils, to the advanced classes, which are stage 4. In the stage 4, we are studying exactly what I told you earlier, Kashmiri Shaivism, the top tradition of Tantra. Then people are developed enough in their spirituality, and we are studying the fundamental texts of Kashmiri Shaivism, the yoga of the crown chakra, we can call it, because it's mostly on the crown chakra, plus a variety of other subjects, many, many other subjects. There we study not only the texts and practices of Kashmiri Shaivism, but we study elements pertaining to the study of the magic of the West and of the East. A lot of things starting from self-hypnosis, hypnosis, self-suggestion, radionics, radiesthesia, and other of these parapsychological sciences, many, many other things which have place at that level. And usually this advanced cycle goes by a cycle of 4 years. Like it takes me about 4 years to go through the whole cycle of those teachings. So those of you who really want to absorb all the teachings here, and I didn't mention the workshops, Tantra workshops, Art of Dying, Metaphysics, Kashmiri Shaivism, and many, many others which don't come now to my mind, astrology, and so many others, in where we try to teach at very good standards. You can expect to learn everything we have to offer in approximately 10 years. if you come up every season for 7 to 8 months, if you are here at least 7, 8 months every season, you can learn all of it in 10 seasons, in 10 years. That's about the bulk of the knowledge. That's about the amount of knowledge. And I am not knowledgeable of all the tantric tradition. For example, I am not capable to play tantric music. There is a special art of the tantric music on Rudravina. I just know the general theory of it. I have never pinched a string of a single Rudravina in my life, and I don't know, therefore, what it is. So I myself am having many, many things from the tantric traditions which I don't know, and I wonder if there has ever been on the face of the earth one person who knew all the branches of all the tantric tradition, of all the tantric metaphysics. But I can tell you that the way it goes here, Agama is a pretty complete, pretty thorough, pretty deep tradition and lineage. Our methods are not experimental. Most of all these things, I've studied them with my teachers, and even the ways in which some of these things are aggregated, like the fact that you work 60 hours in this way and then 120 hours in that way, and so on. These are things which I have got from my teachers, who had got them from their teachers. Even the way we teach the 500-hour TTC program, like 3 months, 90 days, non-stop, full-time yoga, and so on. These are all things which I have received from my teachers. They are not inventions. Of course, I, being a human being, I have brought my own creativity into it, and some of the things in Agama are my personal contribution. But I am at the same time in love with the tradition and with the things which I have learned from the teachers. And this is what you can hope to get in Agama. Whenever you wish to study, a little bit now, a little bit then, whenever you want. It depends also how deep you are trying to go in this tradition. I'm telling you, and I think I said it last time, and it's worth it to be said again, I know it for a fact. Like, I know where people are going. People are changing teachers, migrating on esotouristic trips and so on. There are people who go from Bali to India and from Tibet to Thailand and from Goenka Vipassanas to I don't know what other retreats all over the world. And many of them, I talk to them being my pupils, and therefore I know where Agama is placed in the constellation of things which are happening in this world today. As I said, we even had people who disliked me personally or disliked something which happened in Agama, and then they went elsewhere, and then they came after 3 years or 5 years, and they told me, Swami, I still don't like you very much, but I have tried to find a similar school that teaches anything similar. Now I know what to look for, and I've been all around in India and other places, and I couldn't find it. There isn't a place like Agama. I don't want to brag about it. I just want to say it in this way. We know that in Agama we have got gold. That we know that in Agama we have got some aspects of the spiritual teachings which are very powerful and very rare. And it is my dream that yoga of a spiritual kind will be transmitted to the whole world. When I lived in the West, they still had yellow pages in those days. They cut a lot of trees to make yellow pages. And in those yellow pages, when you looked at the yoga part of it, most of the yoga which you found in the yellow pages was just gymnastics. There were 55 yoga clubs and studios, and all of them were teaching gymnastic forms of yoga. It is since those days that I said there has to be in these yellow pages at least one offer of something else. Like, it's unacceptable that when people look through the yellow pages and they say, I would like to do some yoga because I read a very inspiring book of yoga by Shivananda, by Eliade, by somebody, and then I open the yellow pages when I finish the book full of enthusiasm, and when I go to all those 55, they are all a disappointment because all they can do is stretch my back. And then it has been my dream, and we'll see if it will come true and when and how, that in every city of this world in the yellow pages, there should be also a metaphysical and esoteric course of yoga of another type than just the monkey yoga, because this is what yoga has been from the very beginning. And Agama is in the position that we have been given responsibility to preserve many of these forms of yoga. That's why we are very eager to pass them on to you. We are very hopeful that out of you there will rise the future great teachers of yoga. I remember when I lived with the guru who gave me sannyasa with Swami Munishananda when I lived in India, I asked one of his disciples who called himself Dharmananda, I asked that Dharmananda, not our Dharmananda here, I asked that Dharmananda, he was Indian, and I asked him, what is your opinion about yoga in India? And he had been a yoga teacher in Rishikesh for a number of years. And he said, I have to admit, Indian being, that yoga has already migrated to the West. Like he said, I being an Indian yoga teacher, I'm looking around and I don't see any young man, Indian young man, wanting to come to me and to study yoga. It's like only Phangangs are coming to study yoga, and it's like we wonder why all the interest about yoga in India is not with the Indians anymore. That's not entirely true, of course, but it is an observation which many teachers have given about, especially about some of the lineages and traditions in yoga. I could say much more, but I would say let's stop here. This night was dedicated to introduce to you Agama. What we do in Agama, we are a form of tantric yoga. We are on the side of Shakti, like we think that the Shakti aspect of the universe is immortal and divine, as well as the Shiva aspect. And therefore, we full on go in the directions of tantric yoga. And I taught you which are our powers, which are our most powerful lineages, our most powerful forms of yoga. And if you'll have questions, don't hesitate to bring them up in the Q&As. And in the next satsang, it is my inspiration at this point. I felt that it hasn't been given clearly lately, to resume once more the idea of yoga in daily life. You know that we have yoga for healing. We have yoga which can promote your daily life. We have yoga for paranormal accomplishments. And then there is the yoga for the pure spiritual accomplishments. I sometimes feel that this idea, this approach, that if you do 2 years of yoga and you never come to yoga afterwards, you just take what you have learned and you use it out there, you can do amazing things. With the things which you learned from yoga, you can change your daily life and perform astonishing things in the daily life, because yoga gives so many skills. Yoga is not only about bending over and touching your toes. If that would be the skill which you got from yoga, like what's the big deal that you can touch your toes? But yoga is not that, as you know by now. It's much more than that. So I will start, it will take me probably three Thursdays, 3 satsangs, to describe to you the image about doing yoga as support for your life, how to promote your life ideals and goals through that. It comes also in the concept that we do here in Agama a workshop called the Yoga of Perfect Accomplishment, which is exactly that, yoga for accomplishing everything. Let me give an absolutely ridiculous example. Let's suppose one of you back home there, you have a car, and now you fell in love with Agama and you'd like to sell your car, and you don't manage. Is there something that you can do in yoga which will accelerate the sale of your car? Sounds absurd, right? Can you do something in yoga to accelerate the sale of your car? Yes, actually you can. It's just a matter of creativity and understanding truly what yoga is, what mental concentration is, what the power of the mind is, and then you will learn even that. So given this context, my next satsangs will be about how to apply yoga in your daily life for your daily life. With this, it is enough for tonight. Thank you all for joining. Namaste to all of you, and I hope to see you in the coming satsangs.